The creators of South Park, Stone and Trey Parker, are by far some of the most successful names in animation, which is ironic considering they aren't animators. After the two moved to Los Angeles in the mid-90s to pursue careers in film and television, and upon failing to achieve that goal for many years, creating field pilots for kid shows and producing an underperforming movie. As we all know, their persistence eventually paid off though, as they would catch the eye of a Fox executive who commissioned the two to create the construction paper Christmas short that would eventually lead them to landing what would go on to become one of the biggest animated shows in history. The duo made the incredibly admirable choice to stick by their creation through thick and thin, instead of doing what many other creators would do by eventually leaving the series and taking their voice along with it. But Matt and Trey still, after almost 30 years, still choose to write, direct, and star in every single episode of South Park. With other show creators, I can understand why you would want to eventually remove yourself from working on the same thing for so long. Not only am I sure fatigue sets in after repeating the same process again and again, but that's only further exemplified through the tedious, grueling process that is animation. And that's why Matt and Trey were put in a unique position. See, instead of having to manage a season of an animated cartoon over the course of 1 or 2 entire years, meticulously ensuring everything is as it should be while accounting for hundreds of artists, many of which residing in a country on the other side of the world, all Matt and Trey would have to do to check up on their animation is walk down the hall. With South Park's infamously simple animation style allowing them to produce an entire 22-minute episode in as short as 6 days, along with every facet of the series being taken care of in their own studio, it allows them to whip out an entire season of the show in a fraction of the time. Whereas The Simpsons can spend 1 to 2 years on season 432, South Park can have it all done and out the door within 10 weeks. However, instead of taking that opportunity to shit out a batch of episodes and then proceed to do nothing for the rest of the year, take a nice 10-month break, during South Park's off time, it's given the two the rare opportunity to pursue other projects that interest them. Right now, they seem to be the busiest they've ever been. Well, in the past, they've used this free time to produce things like an incredibly successful and amazingly reviewed Broadway musical, The Book of Mormon. Now they're renovating and reopening their favorite childhood restaurant, Casa Bonita, getting involved in more video game deals, still waiting on that weed company to come to fruition, as well as currently making a brand new movie with Kendrick Lamar of all people. Seeing this made me realize, holy shit, this is gonna be their first movie in over 20 years. To which that got me wondering, how many films have Matt and Trey made? 5. The answer is 5. Technically. Obviously, the most obvious one would be the South Park movie. Fantastic film, as we all know, a really stellar musical, which I've talked about long ago on this channel, so I don't want to repeat myself. However, I will repeat that I have a new channel where I upload re-edited compilations of older videos to help relax and sleep too, so check it out. Got a South Park one up on there with that video about bigger, longer, and uncut, so subscribe. But other than that, there are at least 4 other notable films the two have been majorly involved with, 2 of which released before South Park, and 2 after. And if you're a fan of South Park, then maybe a lot of little gags in the series are gonna start making a lot more sense after I delve into this stuff. Like, did you ever wonder what this weird poster was in Eric's room? Probably not, but, well, it's actually an edited picture of Trey Parker from the poster of their first major release, Orgazmo. How about this line from the Mel Gibson episode?
This is about being able to hold bad filmmakers responsible. This is just like when we got our money back for BASEketball.
That always confused me as a kid. What are they saying? Why are they calling it BASEketball? Well, little did 7-year-old me know that they were actually name-dropping a 90s comedy that stars them. So many staples of South Park began through the duo's other work. The joke about Trey calling Cartman's mom Leanne because of an ex-girlfriend he wanted to forever ridicule was something he'd done long before South Park came to be, along with Kyle's trapper hat coming off to reveal a massive afro. And so today I thought it would be fun to check out the creators of South Park's other movies, to look into their humble beginnings. At least 3 of these films have gone on to become considered cult classics, presumably because eventually the DVD distributors were able to slap a big "From the creators of South Park" sticker on the cover to drum up sales. But do any of these films stand on their own? No, not really. The very first feature-length film Trey Parker ever directed was Alfred Packer the Musical, swiftly changed to Cannibal the Musical, as I'm sure the distributor was terrified that people would not know who the fuck Alfred Packer was. Now, if you were unaware, like me, he was an American prospector who in 1873 was tasked with guiding a group of men from Utah to Colorado, yet upon returning to civilization appeared to have been the sole survivor after the other 5 men abandoned him in the snowy mountains. After a while, though, folks began realizing his tellings of the events became more and more inconsistent. He didn't seem like a man who was on the brink of starvation. And that's when he was accused of cannibalism, eating them. That's what cannibalism means. It's pretty commonly believed he did do it, even though as far as I'm aware he went on to live a pretty fruitful life. But at the very least, it's also believed he did it out of necessity instead of just a lust for blood or something. But Trey Parker, someone who was enthralled by the admittedly interesting story, decided he would make a fake trailer for a musical all about this exposition while in film class, simply shooting it with his friends. After finishing the trailer and drumming up a lot of attention after sharing it around, he managed to raise a whopping $125,000 to shoot an entire film based around it. And with that, they started production, with it later being picked up by a VHS and DVD distributor in 1996, who barely released it outside of Colorado because, well, again, who the fuck is Alfred Packer? Did you know? I didn't know. That was until one fateful day in August of 1997, where this small, little-known show called South Park premiered, in which its immense success and popularity led to the distributor deciding to release it on a much wider scale. Again, most likely so they could stick a massive South Park logo on the cover. Since then, it's got a couple re-releases, once in 2008, once on the PSP for some reason. And boy, I really do wonder how some random South Park fan picking this up after recognizing the name without knowing anything about it would feel after watching it, because this shit's rough. Cannibal works as a fun and charming piece of the duo's history and one of the rare times you actually get to see them doing some on-screen acting. And while there's a lot of elements here that you could tell would go on to be reused for the cartoon, on its own it's not really worth looking at. It's very amateur.
You're doomed. You're all doomed.
Cannibal follows a setup fairly similar to what happened in real life. However, as it goes on, it starts to get more and more fabricated for the sake of having a main character you actually like and feel bad for. See, instead of being a cannibal here, Alfred Packer is instead simply accused of being a cannibal, getting thrown in jail while a reporter lady asks him to recount the events that transpired in the mountains, in which he realizes over time that Alfred might actually be innocent. He didn't eat all those people in the woods. He wouldn't hurt a fly. It was instead a wacky turn of events that caused the blame to get pinned on him, and so now she has to quickly prove his innocence before the upcoming execution. There are like 6 men on this exposition, but I honestly couldn't tell you a thing about half of them. They all blend together. I like Trey as a protagonist. I mentioned in my Seth MacFarlane film career video how Seth really doesn't work as a leading man. He's so unlikable, on screen at least. But with Trey Parker, it's the opposite. I think he's great in that everyman kind of role. He's super likable and elevates whatever good material is here.
You little bastard, now you must die.
Matt Stone's character also works pretty well, but I think that's mostly just because his traits are a lot more prevalent, being the oblivious dumb guy who gets way in over his head, along with Dean Beckar, who is so short that you couldn't help but notice him. Funnily enough, he ended up appearing in a few other projects from Trey that I'm going to talk about later, along with doing a single voice in South Park as the iconic character of Chris. Remember Chris? He was Seaton's boyfriend in a random episode in season 4. Yeah, him.
Oh, hello. You must be Saddam Hussein.
And you must be Mr. Assface.
But other than that, for the most part, Cannibal, the musical, is just kind of boring. Scenes drag out for way too long with not much of note happening. You can really feel the budget constraints when 95% of the film just takes place in nondescript fields. I think the movie is at its best when it leans into this lower budget. For example, there's this part where they wind up at a Native American village where all the teepees are just scattered throughout a field, and they're so small that you couldn't even fit inside them. On top of that, all the Native Americans are just played by Japanese people. Trey clearly was just in contact with them because, again, some of these guys wind up appearing in future movies. This is just the Trey Parker cinematic universe.
Besides, you have nothing to worry about. Those crazy trappers left this morning.
The musical aspect also isn't worth writing home about. It's pretty underwhelming. There's not much energy to any of these songs, and what's worse is that they're mostly using these horrible sounding mid-eye instruments. Again, a budgetary thing, but it only aids in it feeling so cheap and not in a charming way. I like the opening song and the love interests where she sings about falling for him, but that's about it. Every other time, I was just looking forward to them finally ending. I will say, however, I am surprised at just how much stuff here wound up getting reused for South Park in some form. Like this part right here where Trey does an early version of the Mr. Garrison voice.
His veins will pop out all over his head.
Or Trey unintentionally using the same form of voice modification that he would go on to use for the little person. That being a balloon.
You serious, man? Don't move!
I'm also not sure if they still do this, with TV being dead and all. I never find myself watching to the end of the credits in South Park episodes anymore. But this little jingle that would play right here, well, that's actually referencing the opening song to Cannibal. That's something.
The sky is blue and all the leaves are green.
Other than that, though, there's not much to say here. I wouldn't go as far as to say Cannibal is a bad movie. Again, there are a bunch of good qualities I like, with the biggest highlight mainly being the fun, amateurish vibe that comes with a group of college students trying to make a film together. But if you remove all that context from it and just look at it as its own thing, it's pretty rough. But fret not, folks, as in 1997, Parker and Stone would get the chance to make another feature-length film, this one being titled Orgazmo. I mentioned earlier about Eric's poster having him, but it was also used as a trophy in this one episode too. They throw this thing in all the time. The biggest impact this movie seems to have made would be opening the duo's eyes to how hard it is working with the MPAA, the people who rate your movies for release. Apparently they kept giving Orgazmo an NC-17 rating with little to no room to budge, meaning they could barely advertise it anywhere, along with not giving them any indication on what they would need to change to get a softer rating. So until South Park's release, this movie really flew under the radar. And all of that is insane because, especially by today's standards, Orgazmo is the team of shit I've ever seen in my life. At least for a movie advertised like this. Orgazmo continues Matt and Trey's obsession with Mormons as we meet Joseph Young, who has been assigned his mission in Los Angeles to spread the word of the Book of Mormon. Upon getting entangled with a porno director, Joe is hired to be the leading star in his new hit film, Orgazmo, with him now having to ensure his girlfriend back in Utah never finds out about this, him only taking the gig so he can afford a wedding at a temple for her. I think Orgazmo really suffers from a similar issue as Cannibal, in that on its own it's decent, but gets really funny once they start having fun with it and begin throwing in all this dumb shit that catches you off guard.
Well, you two boys can just fuck right off. Ma'am?
This movie is good, but it sucks, is probably the best review I could give it. Trey Parker is once again a really good leading man, but they don't push his character far enough. The idea of a good little Mormon man-child getting hired to make a porno was really funny in concept, but they don't go any further than him looking mildly uncomfortable. The story starts to get larger and larger as this Japanese man, who is the same man from Cannibal, starts getting harassed by the club next door so he'll sell his sushi restaurant to them. So Trey tries to protect him despite them never sharing a line of dialogue together throughout the whole film as far as I remember. Then it turns out that those same henchmen are working for the director of the movie, and then Joe's fiancée surprises him by coming to town, and so he gets scared and quits the movie, which makes the director kidnap his fiancée and threaten to do stuff to her unless he comes back. It's all over the place, and I kinda like it, but again, I wish it leaned more into the fact that this shit is dumb.
Thanks for trying to help Joe. You know, he could have really hurt me. Ah.
There are a lot of funny moments in isolation here. I like when the same small guy from Cannibal shows up to be Trey's sidekick, making his Orgazmo ray into a real invention that works, and so they start trying to take down the bad guys. All that was fun. I love the random fucking detail that everyone in this movie has only ever seen eating these Pop-Tart ripoffs. There's a big Hollywood party where the waiters are walking around with goddamn trays of these things. And I really wish they leaned more into this idea that Orgazmo became one of the most financially and critically acclaimed movies of all time, despite being nothing more than a crappy, poorly produced porno. But it's only ever used to justify why the director would want to make a sequel so bad. They could have pushed this Trey becoming a celebrity angle way further. And I absolutely love Matt Stone's character here. He has like 5 lines in the whole movie, but the payoff is great.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a queer or nothing. You know, I don't want to sound like a queer or nothing. You know, I don't want to sound like a queer or nothing. I don't want to sound like a queer or nothing. No, I don't want to sound like a queer or nothing, but I'd kind of like to make love to you tonight.
Honestly, I think the whole ending works really well. I just wish the rest were as silly. The film has such a slow beginning. It takes so long to get into the good stuff. Okay, not that good stuff. I think the last 5 minutes of this movie is hilarious. Them busting into the set to burn the whole thing down, being shown through a basic looking model was fun. I really love this joke. And I was pretty stone-faced through a majority of this thing, but nothing caught me off guard more than this cliffhanger ending.
We're gonna have to amputate your pee-pee.
But basically every clip I've shown you, that's like 95% of the highlights. The rest are just overly long scenes that drag on forever. I feel like so much of my enjoyment from this movie, similar to Cannibal, comes from the fact that it's Trey Parker in the leading role. Nothing more. Again, nobody really gave a shit about either of these films before South Park started blowing up, so I have to imagine that's where a majority of their cult status comes from. Okay, but these are both films that the duo wrote and directed. But are there any films that either of them were in that also weren't created by them? Well, yes, actually. Okay, I'm not really going to talk about that, but I will never not laugh at the red carpet premiere where Trey Parker made it clear as day he did not give a fuck about this thing.
Well, now you're here, you're at the premiere, your daughter's here. Is that the most exciting part, or is there something else you're really excited to share with audiences?
No, honestly, this is all, I'm just doing it all through her. I'm just watching her.
You know, I never knew why the Planetarium episode of South Park was called Roger Ebert Should Lay Off the Fatty Foods, but as it turns out, it was the response to the man giving BASEketball a bad review in the papers. Damn. I love BASEketball, it's horrible, but it's great.
Here, heads up, big guy.
With South Park just releasing and becoming a massive success in its first season, veteran filmmaker David Zucker hired the two of them to star in his new buddy comedy, based off an old sport he made up with his friends back in the 80s. BASEketball. Basically basketball with the rules of baseball. Only difference is you're allowed to purposefully fuck with your opponents to distract them. Parker and Stone continually like to make their lack of involvement in this movie very clear, with it being received extremely negatively and only gaining its cult status years after the fact. But I think it's the perfect dumb guy movie, when you want to turn your brain off and just laugh at some tried and true shit.
Players of your caliber should be making the big bucks, don't you agree? Reamer.
I don't know though, I have to question how honest they're being when they're claiming they have little to no involvement here. Must have been enough to bring Dee and Backer back on board. It's so bizarre how he just disappeared after this. What the hell happened to him? Where did he go? Did you do something? Oh, never mind, there he is, still talking about BASEketball.
Oh, hi, I'm Dee and Bahar. And if you're like me, you've been training for the last 20 years to be the greatest BASEketball player the planet's ever seen.
He does steal the show though, he is without a doubt the best character here.
God damn it, man. I swear you guys rip on me 13 or 14 more times, I'm out of here.
BASEketball takes place in this bizarre alternate universe where nobody gives a shit about sports anymore, until Matt and Trey invent this new game that takes over the world, with the whole plot revolving around this evil rich guy trying to come in and poison the game by capitalizing on it in the same ways that made everyone hate the other sports, like being able to sell players to other teams and focusing on excessive merchandise. And so it's up to him to tear the two of them apart and pit them against each other so he can change the rules. But who gives a shit? This movie has a fucking dreadful script, but it is elevated tenfold for Matt and Trey's performances. They are perfect here, I love them. This film is just so fucking mean. It feels like the first time these two have been put in a role that allows them to be pushed to that extreme I wanted so badly from Cannibal and Orgazmo, especially with how much they abuse this one kid. An entire segment of this movie is basically just Stanley's cut from South Park, ironically one of the most hated episodes in that show. But whereas that one failed because it took the illness of an innocent child and played it completely seriously, just to kill him at the very end as a gag, and BASEketball from the beginning, they're just completely wheeling on this kid. They torture him endlessly while in hospital, whack his head off doors, let him drink alcohol. It's all for shock value, of course. The joke is that they're doing stuff you shouldn't do to a kid. Sounds horrible. But the movie is so fast-paced and focused on just being dumb for dumb's sake that I kinda like it. Anytime this movie wants me to focus on the plot, I'm out of it. I couldn't care less. Who gives a shit? But I think this movie is at its best when it's just being as shameless and dogshit as possible, and I mean that in the best way possible.
Dude.
Like, okay, example. Dick jokes are a dime a dozen in these types of movies, right? I feel like most times they do a joke about a guy's dick, it's always about how small it is. I know Family Guy does that a lot. You know, the joke is that Peter Griffin has a small dick, and of course we all laugh. But in BASEketball, they pick the most hilariously lame gag of showing Matt and Trey's dicks as being enormous. So big they drag on the fucking floor. There is just something about making a joke about how giant your star's dicks are that I can't help but find it funny. It's so arrogant. Or when they get to the point where we see the underdogs rise up in popularity, with their team starting to win more and more games to the dismay of the rich guy who wants them to be at their lowest. And they convey this visually to the viewer by including nothing more than a 5-second shot of him reading the newspaper, which literally says something like, "The Bears are winning more and more games." They just did not give a shit, and I love it for that. Overall, I would recommend checking out BASEketball at least once in your life. There is a complete 50-50 chance as to whether or not you'll like it. But if you're a South Park fan, I think you'll lean more on the side of enjoying it.
Dude.
And all that leads us to, as of now, Matt and Trey's most recent film, and by far their most well-known aside from South Park, and that's Team America: World Police. This is another film that didn't do too well initially, but more than made up for it in DVD sales, with it being generally beloved and seen as a genuinely fantastic film, even when removed from the South Park brand. And I couldn't agree more. I'll always remember walking into my dad watching the ending to this movie while thinking to myself, who is that? I recognize that voice from somewhere but just can't put my finger on it. Only to see the credits and realize the director shared her name with the guy listed in all the South Park episodes. It was like the first time I was able to properly recognize the people behind a movie. Team America, if you couldn't tell for some reason, was made entirely using puppets, showcasing a world in which America has their own police force who enforce justice all over the world, stopping terrorists and stuff. This was in production around the time of the war in Iraq, and so they heavily lean into political issues from the time. It's basically the political humor of South Park, but ramped up to 11. But even as someone who is too young, / too on the opposite side of the world, to understand most of this stuff, I still find myself thoroughly enjoying the film, and I think that's a testament to how good it is. Despite very clearly commenting on real-world events, it still stands on its own. None of its political humor ever relies on you knowing what's happening in the world. It only ever elevates the gags. But even then, on its own, the idea of a completely tone-deaf Team America who considers themselves the police of the world is an inherently funny idea, along with Kim Jong-il, who works as a villain who wants to take over the world even when removed from his real-life counterpart. Team America's leader, who funnily enough is played by the same voice actor as Cosmo from Fairly OddParents, decides he wants to hire an actor to sneak into the Middle Eastern terrorist group to find out what their plans are. Which leads to the American Actors Guild, who I can't say the name of, trying to smear their good name. And hey, even if you don't know about any of the political stuff here, it also works on its own as a really good puppet movie. Matt and Trey, even before the film's release, were extremely open about how much they regretted the puppet decision, as they severely underestimated how much work that would take. Something you can clearly understand from watching the behind-the-scenes footage. This looks like a nightmare. Where they're awarded some leeway, however, is in them finally completely committing to the goofiness of their concept. The idea that something looking funny can sometimes be sillier than any joke they could have told.
If you're interested, follow me this way.
The first shot of this film, I think, is really excellent, starting with this silly little cheap-looking puppet show before panning out and revealing this massive Paris set, showcasing a bustling city that looks fantastic. Which only makes it more funny when they can do all this with puppets, yet still can't find a way to make them naturally walk around and emote without looking dumb as hell. And they use that to their advantage. On top of that, Matt and Trey once again show off their great acting talents, doing a performance that is amazing, yet terrible at the same time, intentionally of course.
Haka Sherpa Sherpa, a bacala. Oh, Durka Durka Durka. I've never seen acting that good.
He's amazing.
And on top of all that, it also stands as a fantastic musical, with there being a bunch of fun and catchy songs to complement whatever's happening. Personally, I love Freedom Isn't Free, where they just sit the Gary puppet around actual places in America with no care as to how tiny that makes him look. Pearl Harbor Sucks is great too, but the absolute highlight would without a doubt have to be Everyone Has AIDS. I mean, how could it not with a name like that? Team America is one of the best comedies out there. I would highly recommend checking it out. It's one of the rare movies that is simultaneously aged while not directly getting worse because of that. I really think this has been a pretty inspiring experience. So many people put so much focus on their first projects being good that as a result it can lead to them putting out nothing out of fear of rejection or it being bad. I can almost appreciate many of Matt and Trey's films not being the most amazing things out there. It goes to show their humble beginnings. How talent isn't something you're born with, and instead these are skills that you have to hone and actively improve upon. But that only came from the sheer level of passion that came from the two, to continue fighting for their projects no matter how much things were stacked against them. You know, Team America, the South Park movie, whatever they make, was only possible because of Cannibal, and so that at the very least I can appreciate. It's humbling to sometimes remember that for a period of time, two of the richest and most successful men in television and film today spent their nights sleeping on a stack of dirty laundry until their hard work paid off and their abilities were finally recognized by folks around the world. So keep making South Park and the millions that come with it until the end of time, Matt and Trey. You've earned it.